By the spring of 1945, Benito Mussolini's grip on power had completely collapsed. Italy was in chaos, Nazi Germany was falling, and Mussolini, once feared as Il Duce, was now a desperate man on the run. But his downfall wouldn't end with surrender. It ended with humiliation, violence, and a death as brutal as his rule. Mussolini's rise to power had been nothing short of meteoric. In 1922, after years of political instability and social unrest, Mussolini marched on Rome and demanded control of Italy. The king, Victor Emmanuel III, fearing a civil war, appointed Mussolini as prime minister. Within a few years, Mussolini consolidated his power and transformed Italy into a fascist state. He created a regime marked by extreme nationalism, militarism, and an iron fist control over the press and oppression. His ambition was limitless, and his grand vision for a new Roman Empire led Italy to wage wars in Africa, most notably the invasion of Ethiopia in 1935. His alliance with Hitler, sealed in 1939, further entrenched Italy's role in World War II. Mussolini, for a time, was seen as a powerful force in Europe, a man who had successfully restored Italy's pride after the humiliation of World War I. However, by the early 1940s, the cracks in Mussolini's regime began to show. Italy's military failures were mounting, and in 1940, Italy entered World War II on the side of Nazi Germany, but the war soon turned disastrous. The Italian military was poorly prepared and outmatched, suffering defeat after defeat in North Africa and Greece. In 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily, and the Italian government was thrown into chaos. As Italy's situation deteriorated, public opinion turned sharply against Mussolini. The once popular dictator now faced widespread disillusionment. In July 1943, Mussolini was arrested after a vote of no confidence from his own Grand Council of Fascism. With the support of the king and the military gone, Mussolini's political power collapsed, and he was imprisoned in the mountain fortress of Gran Sasso. But Mussolini's story didn't end there. Adolf Hitler, determined not to lose his Italian ally, launched an audacious rescue mission in September 1943. A group of elite German paratroopers, led by Otto Skorzeny, carried out the Gran Sasso raid, rescuing Mussolini from his mountaintop prison. With Mussolini back in Nazi hands, Hitler set him up as the leader of the Italian Social Republic, a puppet regime based in northern Italy. However, this so-called republic was a shadow of the power Mussolini once held. The Italian Social Republic, also known as the Republic of Salo, existed solely because of Nazi military protection. Mussolini's every move was dictated by Hitler's will, and the Italian people saw him as little more than a tool for German control. His health deteriorated further, and he became increasingly paranoid, dependent on the Germans for protection. As the war continued to spiral out of control for the Axis, Mussolini's role in the Republic of Salo became even more insignificant. In 1944, the Allies made significant headway, pushing north through Italy. In the same year, partisan groups, growing stronger with every passing day, began to launch more effective attacks on Italian fascists and German occupiers. The Italians were no longer willing to fight for Mussolini, and the country's faith in fascism was rapidly fading. By 1945, the writing was on the wall. Italy had been ravaged by years of war and dictatorship, and the public's anger had turned into rage. Mussolini's once fearsome rule was gone, replaced by the iron grip of the Allies and the vengeful partisans. His health had deteriorated to the point where he was reported to be constantly trembling and unable to speak coherently at times. His once strong will had crumbled, and he became increasingly reliant on Clara Petacci, his loyal mistress, who stayed by his side until the very end. As partisan groups closed in on northern Italy, Mussolini attempted to flee, believing he could escape to neutral Switzerland. On April 25, 1945, as Milan fell to the partisans, Mussolini, disguised as a German officer, left the city in a convoy of retreating German soldiers. His hopes rested on crossing the border and finding safety in Switzerland, but his plans were doomed to fail. On the morning of April 27, 1945, Mussolini's desperate escape came to a crashing halt near the small village of Dongo, on the northwestern edge of Lake Como. His convoy, consisting of dozens of vehicles filled with retreating German soldiers and fascist officials, was intercepted by members of the 52nd Garibaldi Partisan Brigade. These local resistance fighters had been combing the area, hunting down Nazi collaborators and anyone attempting to flee north. At first, the partisans believed the convoy was just another group of fleeing German troops. But as they began searching the vehicles, something felt off. In one truck, they discovered a man dressed in a Luftwaffe overcoat and helmet, slumped in the corner, trying not to make eye contact. When they demanded his identification papers, he reluctantly handed over the documents bearing a fake name, but his face betrayed him. One of the partisans, Urbano Lazzaro, immediately grew suspicious. The man's features were unmistakable. Beneath the German uniform was the face of the former Duce. His square jaw, graying hair, and piercing eyes gave him away. The partisan told the others. Word spread quickly. The soldiers yanked him out of the truck. Alongside him was Clara Petacci, who refused to abandon him even in his final moments. They were separated from the rest of the convoy and taken to a small local building under armed guard. The situation was tense. Partisan fighters debated what to do, while news of Mussolini's capture raced through the area. There was no question about guilt. For over 20 years, Mussolini had ruled Italy with brutality, crushing dissent, dragging the country into World War II, and aligning it with Hitler. Under his fascist regime, countless Italians had been imprisoned, tortured, or executed. Entire towns had been bombed. Jewish families had been deported, and thousands of soldiers had died in campaigns they never supported. For many of the partisans, Mussolini wasn't just a political figure. He was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in Italy. There was no formal trial, no courtroom, no defense. That same day, representatives of the National Liberation Committee of Northern Italy debated Mussolini's fate. Their decision was swift and final. They believed handing him over to the Allies would only lead to delays or leniency. Italy's civil war had turned bloody, and the resistance fighters were determined to settle things their way. Justice, as they saw it, had to be immediate, and it had to be public. As the sun began to set on April 27th, Mussolini sat under heavy guard, stripped of power and awaiting his fate. He was no longer feared. At dawn on April 28, 1945, Benito Mussolini and Clara Petacci were removed from their holding place in the small town of Dongo. They were loaded into a vehicle under tight guard and driven along the western shore of Lake Como. Their destination was the village of Giulino di Mezzegra, a quiet, upper-class area surrounded by mountains and silence, chosen deliberately to carry out the execution far from crowds or interruptions. The man chosen to carry out the sentence was Walter Aldicio, a senior member of the communist wing of the Italian resistance, who used the nom de guerre Colonel Valerio. Alongside him were a handful of armed partisans, including Aldo Lampredi and Michel Moretti, who witnessed the event and later gave detailed accounts. The orders, they claimed, had come from the National Liberation Committee. Mussolini reportedly said very little during the ride. He sat in silence, dressed in the same German overcoat he had been captured in, his face pale and expression blank. Petacci, by contrast, was nervous and agitated. She refused to be separated from him, even as they reached the gates of Villa Belmonte, a secluded estate on the side of the road. Aldicio ordered them to stand against a low stone wall in front of the villa's iron fence. Clara Petacci began to scream and clutch at him, refusing to move away even when told she could leave. She knew what was coming, and she chose to die beside him. Aldicio later claimed in his written testimony that after a brief pause, he raised his French-made MAS-38 submachine gun and opened fire. The gun reportedly jammed after the first few shots, forcing him to take another weapon, either a backup gun or one handed to him by Moretti, and finish the job. Mussolini was shot multiple times in the chest and face. One of the bullets tore through his jaw, mangling his features beyond recognition. Petacci, who had been clinging to him, was also hit by a volley of bullets and fell beside him. Their bodies lay in the dirt, lifeless and bloodied, in the shadow of the iron fence and stone wall. The partisans wanted to make a statement that fascism had been defeated, but they also knew that this was only the beginning of Mussolini's final humiliation. His death would not be hidden or quiet. His body was destined for public display, to show the entire country that the dictatorship was over and there would be no comeback. What followed next would be remembered around the world. After the execution, their bodies, along with those of several top fascist officials, including Alessandro Pavolini and Niccolo Bombacci, were loaded into a military transport truck. The journey to Milan covered over 50 miles and passed through towns that had been devastated by years of war and fascist rule. The partisans escorting the bodies were headed to Piazzale Loreto, a large public square in Milan with a chilling history. Just 8 months earlier, on August 10, 1944, 15 members of the anti-fascist resistance had been executed in that same square by Mussolini's forces. Their bodies were dumped in public as a warning, left in the summer heat for hours while people were forced to walk by and look. That massacre left deep scars in the city's memory. Locals never forgot the horror or the cold defiance of the fascists who ordered it. Now, with Mussolini dead, the square became a place of reckoning. The corpses were unceremoniously thrown from the truck onto the hard pavement. No coffins, no coverings. Their bodies were dropped like trash in the very place where the regime had taken innocent lives. The partisans made no effort to protect the bodies from the public. On the contrary, they stepped back and let the people of Milan do what they wished. A crowd gathered quickly. Word spread fast that Il Duce's body had arrived. Civilians who had lost family to the war or fascist violence poured into the square. Some stood in silence, watching with disbelief. But others came with rage boiling over. They spat on Mussolini's corpse. Some kicked it in the face or ribs. Women who had suffered heavily under wartime hardship struck him with their shoes. A man pushed his way through the crowd and fired several more bullets into Mussolini's lifeless body, shouting insults as he did. His face had already been disfigured by the execution, but now it was further beaten and unrecognizable. Nearby, Clara Petacci's body was also attacked. Though she had not held political power, many blamed her for staying loyal to Mussolini to the end and for benefiting from his rule while others starved. Her corpse was dragged and beaten by those who had lost everything. This was not a military funeral. It was public vengeance, and it was about to get even more grotesque. At the edge of Piazzale Loreto, near a partially bombed petrol station, the partisans began preparing for the final act of Mussolini's humiliation. They retrieved thick metal wires from the station and tied them around the ankles of the corpses. One by one, the bodies were hoisted up by the heels, their heads swinging just feet above the ground. Mussolini's body was lifted first, strung up under the overhang of the petrol station roof. His coat fell open, exposing the wounds on his chest and stomach. Blood seeping down his shirt and face, dripping slowly to the ground. Clara Petacci was hung beside him. Her skirt fell downward, exposing her legs. Then the bodies of the other executed fascist leaders were raised next to them. The positioning had historical symbolism. In Renaissance Italy, traitors were often hanged upside down as a warning to others. The crowd below grew larger. Children were lifted up by their parents to get a better view. Some people laughed. Others shouted curses. Many snapped photographs despite the gruesome scene. Journalists and photographers captured it all. Soon the photos were circulating in newspapers across Europe and America. In the images, Mussolini's face is barely recognizable. His mouth is twisted, his eyes swollen shut, and bloodstains cover his uniform. Petacci, suspended beside him, looks just as lifeless, her body contorted from the hanging. The sight shocked the outside world, not because Mussolini had been executed, but because of how it was done. For many Italians, this grotesque display was not excessive. It was necessary. Mussolini had led them into war, stripped away freedoms, partnered with Hitler, and left Italy in ruins. For others, however, the scene raised uncomfortable questions about justice, mob rule, and vengeance. It was April 29, 1945, just 9 days later. Adolf Hitler would kill himself in his Berlin bunker. Germany would soon surrender. The world was about to witness the official end of World War II in Europe. But in Piazzale Loreto, the war had already ended, with the lifeless body of a former dictator hanging in front of the people he once ruled. After the shocking public display, Mussolini's body was removed from the petrol station and taken to the city morgue for official autopsy and documentation. The Italian authorities wanted to confirm his death, record the damage to his body, and prevent any doubts about his fate. Doctors noted multiple gunshot wounds, broken bones, and deep trauma caused by the beating and public abuse. Despite the violent hatred many Italians felt toward him, the state still had to decide what to do with Mussolini's remains. Officials feared that if the body were buried in a known location, fascist supporters might turn it into a shrine. They also worried that his enemies might try to desecrate the grave, so the decision was made to bury him in secret. In the middle of the night, Mussolini's body was placed in a coffin and quietly buried in an unmarked grave in Milan's Musoccio cemetery, under the name Nicola Bianchi. Only a handful of officials knew the location, and for a while, the plan worked. The grave was quiet, and the public didn't know where Il Duce had been laid to rest. But the secrecy didn't last. In April 1946, a group of neo-fascist loyalists, led by Domenico Lecisi, a young militant who idolized Mussolini, broke into the cemetery under cover of darkness. They located the unmarked grave, dug up the body, and stole the coffin. The incident caused a national scandal. Newspapers across Italy and abroad reported the bizarre theft. Police launched a massive manhunt. Lecisi and his group kept the corpse hidden for months, moving it between safe houses, church crypts, and secret locations in northern Italy. During this time, rumors spread that Mussolini's body was being passed around fascist circles like a holy relic. Eventually, the thieves were caught, and the body was recovered in August 1946 in a monastery near Milan, where it had been concealed by sympathetic monks. Rather than return it to the grave, the Italian government decided to keep Mussolini's remains locked away. For the next 11 years, the body was held under tight security by the Capuchin friars at the Certosa di Pavia, a monastery complex. The state hoped that over time, public emotions would fade and Mussolini's memory would lose its power. That didn't happen. His supporters lobbied for years to have the body returned to his family. Finally, in 1957, Italian Prime Minister Oddone Zolli, himself a conservative Catholic who had ties to the Christian Democrats, agreed to release the remains. He made the decision quietly without much publicity, fearing backlash from those who still remembered the horrors of fascist rule. Mussolini's body was delivered to his widow, Rachel, and then transported to his birthplace, the small town of Predappio in Emilia-Romagna. There, the body was buried in the family crypt at the San Cassiano Cemetery. The tomb is made of black marble and bears Mussolini's name, along with the words, Benito Mussolini Duce. It didn't take long for the site to become a magnet for fascist sympathizers from across Italy and beyond. Even today, especially on the anniversaries of his birth, July 29th, and death, April 28th, groups of admirers dressed in black shirts visit the tomb. They leave behind Italian flags, fascist slogans, and handwritten notes, praising Mussolini as a misunderstood patriot. Some even perform Roman salutes at the grave. Local authorities have tried over the years to discourage these pilgrimages, but Predappio has quietly embraced its controversial role in history. Souvenir shops in the town sell Mussolini-themed merchandise, including postcards, busts, and calendars. Some residents argue that the grave helps the town's economy. Others say it glorifies a man who led Italy into dictatorship, alliance with Hitler, and disastrous war. Mussolini's fall was one of the most violent and humiliating endings for any leader in modern history. He went from dictator to fugitive to a corpse hanging in a public square in just a matter of days.